Within this photo is a original funketeer and one of the greatest icons of music in history. He's within this photo. He is the lone African American in this photo, a lone black person. You see him right here, right in the photo here. Big icon. You know who that is? Well, that's James Ambrose Johnson Jr., born on February the 1st, 1948. Musician, singer, producer, arranger, and songwriter. And very funky, very rebellious, and very iconic figure in music business. Oh, you saying you don't know who James Ambrose Johnson Jr. is? Well, maybe you know James Ambrose Johnson Jr. by his stage name. The one and only Rick James. Now do you know who I'm talking about? The one and only funketeer himself, Rick James. And I'm going to give you a little bit of insight and detail on Mr. Rick James. Mad props, Mr. Rick James here. Rick James was originally signed by A&M Records in 1973, and the following year, 1974, he released his first single, which was called My Mama, on the A&M record label. And it was a minor hit, but it was a big club hit. It was a minor hit, and it was real big in the clubs at that time in 1974 when it was released. From there, he ended up forming a band, the Stone City Band, in 1977. And 1977 also was the year that he signed with Gordy Records, which was a subsidiary of Motown Records by Motown founder Berry Gordy. So he was on Gordy Records in 1977. He signed with them. So he moved on. Him and his Stone City Band signed in 1977 to Gordy Records, by the way. Rick's first debut album released on Gordy Records was called Come Get It. And it features the hit singles You and I, Funky You and I, his Funky You and I hit, and another hit, Mary Jane. So You and I and Mary Jane was featured on his debut album for Gordy Records, Come and Get It. Rick's debut album for Gordy Records, like I said, was released in 1978. I'm not sure if I said it previous, but his debut album, Come Get It, was released in 1978. He followed that up in 1979 with the release of Bustin' Out of L7, another album in 1979. And the biggest hit single on that album was the title track, Bustin' Out. I'm busting out with some serious funk. Well, I don't want to sing, but Bustin' Out. That's one of my favorites from Rick James. That is one of my personal favorites from Rick James. Rick went on to follow that up with his most successful album to date. The most successful album of his career, actually. Street Songs, or most successful album, yes, of his career, Street Songs. And that was released in 1981. And like I said, this was Rick's most successful album. It included the hit singles Give It To Me Baby. And it also included his best-selling song in his career, Super Freak. And might be the most well-known of his catalog, Super Freak by Rick James. That was on the Street Songs album as well. And there was also another big hit you might have heard of that came from that Street Songs album. Fire and Desire, which was a duet with his protege, Tina Marie. Interesting fact about the song Fire and Desire. They originally, the female part on that track was originally going to be sung by Diana Ross. Can you imagine Diana Ross singing the female part of Fire and Desire song? It would have definitely changed the song drastically. It would have been, I don't know if that would have worked out. I'm glad they eventually got Tina Marie to sing that part. That's all I'm saying. I don't think Fire and Desire with Rick James and Diana Ross. I can't imagine it. I don't know if you all can imagine it, but I can't see it. But yes, Fire and Desire, Rick James featuring his protege, Tina Marie. Big hit from the Street Songs album. From his most successful album, he went to release another successful album. Not as successful as Street Songs, but successful in his own right, called Cold Blooded. He released Cold Blooded in 1983. It featured the hit, the title track Cold Blooded, and it also featured another hit, a duet with Rick and the one and only legendary Smokey Robinson on the track Ebony Eyes. Rick James and Smokey Robinson, Ebony Eyes, which was featured also on the Cold Blooded album that was released in 1983. Rick James continued to release music through the mid 80s all the way through the 2000s. He continued to release music. He was constantly releasing music. None of it reached the success of his previous successful albums, but he was consummate as far as releasing music. From, like I said, from that 1983 release of Cold Blooded through the early 2000s, he was consistent on releasing music. And also he went through a couple of trials and tribulations through that time. So he had his trials and tribulations. Life was lifing for Rick in between that time as well. So, but he was releasing music, and like I said, it was never anything that was as successful as the previous successful albums that he had, and music that he had. But he did have, he had a couple of bright spots on them albums as well, from 1983 to the early 2000s. So he had a couple of successful, critically acclaimed type music in that time. But like I said, he was consummate. I mean, he released a good deal of music in between that time as well. And Rick was doing his thing. Rick was ricking, as they say. And so he was consummate. He was constantly working. So it wasn't that he wasn't working from the mid 1980s on through the 2000s. He was consistently still working. And he was doing his thing. So he was still out in the public eye. And I find this interesting of his shirt, Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. He kind of represented that whole thing. He was definitely can be considered a wild child of music. Definitely, Rick. Fun time. Rick James. Yeah. Definitely iconic, Rick James. In June of 2004, BET decided to recognize Rick James for all his career accomplishments up until that point. Well-deserved recognition for Rick, because he well deserved it. Rick James became real famous for one line that he said at that award show. Just one line that he said, the statement that he made at this award show is iconic. And it almost defines Rick James himself. And wow, it was that iconic. And I'm gonna share it with you. This was in June of 2004 at the BET Awards, and this goes along with Rick James. This is like iconic for Rick James. I'm gonna let you check this out if you haven't already.
And for that girl backstage, make it perfectly clear. Never mind who you thought I was. I'm Rick James, bitch.
That get me every time. That was wild. That's Rick James. I'm Rick James, bitch. Period. He should have put a period behind. I'm Rick James, bitch. Period. I don't know exactly who he was aiming that statement to. It's not real clear who he directed that to, but whoever it was, they learned that day who Rick James be. They learned that day definitely who Rick James was. Oh man, Rick James unfiltered and all that. Rick James raw right there. But yeah, that's cool. At the BET Awards, no less. Unfortunately, approximately 2 months after Rick James proclaimed who he was on that 2004 BET Awards, proclaimed definitively who he was on that 2004 at the 2004 BET Awards, he unfortunately got called home to our Heavenly Father in August of 2004. And his legacy should be always held up, because Rick James was legendary. He left a lot of legendary work behind of his great works, and he should always be upheld. And I give props to Rick James. Rick James, a true funketeer. And hey, continue to rest in peace, brother. And thank you for everything you gave us. And with that, I'm gonna end this video right here. I hope you liked it. Please feel free to like this video, share this video, comment on this video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. And hey, continue to rest in peace, Mr. Rick James. Real name James Ambrose Johnson Jr. Thank you for all that you've given us again. I want to say that. And with that, I am out. Peace!